The heater in the black Gaz-24 Volga was dying. It rattled with a metallic tubercular cough, spitting out tepid air that did nothing to combat the encroaching frost on the windshield. Outside, the landscape of the Krasnoyarsk Krai was a blurring monotony of white and gray, a vast indifference of birch trees and snowdrifts that seemed to stretch on into eternity. It was November 1983. The world was holding its breath, caught in the terrified paralysis of the Able Archer escalation. But inside the car, the geopolitical tension was distilled down to the white-knuckled grip of Alexei Valerievich Volkov on the steering wheel. Alexei was 42 years old, a lieutenant colonel in the 2nd Chief Directorate of the KGB. He was a man composed of sharp angles and silence, wearing a heavy wool coat that smelled of cheap tobacco and anxiety. To the rest of the world, to his neighbors in the comfortable Nomenklatura apartment block on Kutuzovsky Prospect in Moscow, he was a loyal servant of the apparatus. He was the kind of man who filed his reports on time, who attended party meetings with the requisite amount of boredom, and who never asked questions that weren't printed on the page in front of him. But that man had ceased to exist 3 days ago. The man driving the Volga now was a ghost, a defector in spirit who hadn't yet crossed a border, fleeing from a shadow that was growing longer with every kilometer. Beside him, wrapped in 2 blankets and wearing a fur hat that looked too large for her head, sat his daughter, Katya. She was 15 years old. She had her mother's eyes, a piercing, intelligent blue that seemed to see right through the bureaucratic fog of Soviet life, and her father's stubborn set of the jaw. She hadn't spoken for the last 200 kilometers. She was watching the taiga rush by, her breath misting against the cold glass of the passenger window. She didn't know the full extent of the file sitting in the false bottom of Alexei's briefcase in the trunk. But she knew enough. She knew that they had left Moscow in the middle of the night without saying goodbye to her friends. She knew that her father had burned his personal address book in the kitchen sink, the ashes swirling down the drain like gray water. And she knew that they weren't going on a vacation. "Are you cold?" Alexei asked. His voice sounded rusty, unused. Katya turned slightly, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It's fine, Papa." "Where are we really going?" Alexei tightened his grip on the wheel. This was the question he had been dreading, the question that chipped away at the carefully constructed lie of a camping trip. But Katya was not a child of 7 or 8. She was a teenager of the stagnation era, cynical and sharp. She knew the difference between a holiday and an escape. "We are going to the Zaimka," Alexei said, using the word for a remote Siberian hunting cabin. "It's a place I used to go with colleagues, a long time ago, before you were born." "Why?" Katya asked. The single word hung in the cold air of the car, heavy and demanding. Alexei looked at her for a brief second before returning his eyes to the icy road. "Because, Katushka, I have made a mistake at work. A political mistake. And until I can fix it, until I can prove that the mistake was not mine, it is not safe for us in Moscow." It was a sanitized version of the truth. The reality was far darker. Alexei had not made a mistake. He had uncovered a catastrophe. Working in internal counterintelligence, he had stumbled upon Operation Red Ledger, a rogue initiative within the Directorate, planning to sell the identities of deep-cover Soviet agents in the West to the highest bidder. Not to the Americans, but to a third-party broker in the Middle East to fund a private slush fund for 3 high-ranking generals. Alexei had the ledger. He had the proof. And when he had tried to bring it to his superior, General Orlov, he had seen the flicker of recognition in the general's eyes, the slight hesitation that betrayed him. Orlov was in on it. Alexei had managed to leave the office with his life, but he knew the clock was ticking. They wouldn't arrest him immediately. That would draw attention. They would watch him. They would wait for him to lead them to the evidence. And they would use whatever leverage they could find. Katya was the leverage. His wife, Elena, had passed away from pneumonia 4 years prior. Katya was all he had, and she was the only vulnerability the Directorate could exploit to make him hand over the red ledger. "How long?" Katya asked, her voice small. "I don't know," Alexei admitted. "Weeks, maybe months." They drove in silence as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the snow in shades of violet and bruised blue. The road had degraded from paved asphalt to a rutted track of packed ice and gravel. They were hundreds of miles from the nearest city, deep in the heart of the wilderness where the Soviet state's authority existed only in theory. Here the laws of nature, cold, hunger, and isolation superseded the laws of the party. The car groaned as they crested a ridge. Below them, nestled in a valley of dense pine and cedar, lay a structure that looked less like a cabin and more like a fortress of timber. It was the Zamka. It had been built in the 1950s by a paranoid geology survey team and later abandoned, struck from the official maps. Alexei had found it during a training exercise in his youth and had kept its location memorized. A secret bolt hole for a rainy day. He had never imagined the rainy day would be a blizzard of treason. He stopped the car. The silence of the taiga was absolute. No traffic, no industrial hum, no voices. Just the wind hissing through the needles of the trees. "We are here," Alexei said. He didn't sound relieved. He sounded like a man sentencing his only child to prison. The cabin was freezing. The air inside was stale, smelling of old pine resin, dust, and the dry, earthy scent of abandonment. It was a single large room with a sleeping loft, dominated by a massive brick stove in the center. There was no electricity, no running water. The windows were small and thick, designed to keep heat in and prying eyes out. Alexei moved with a frenetic energy that frightened Katya. He didn't take off his coat. He immediately began unloading the supplies from the trunk of the Volga. He had spent the last of his family savings on the black market in Moscow before fleeing: crates of tinned beef, dried buckwheat, sacks of potatoes, paraffin wax, kerosene, warm felt boots, and a heavy sheepskin coat for Katya. "Listen to me," Alexei said, placing a heavy box of ammunition on the rough-hewn table. He turned to face her, grabbing her shoulders. His hands were shaking. "Katya, you have to listen to everything I say. Your life depends on it. Do you understand?" Katya nodded, her eyes wide. She was frightened, but she didn't cry. Tears were a luxury she sensed she could no longer afford. "I cannot stay with you," Alexei said. The air left the room. Katya pulled back, her voice rising for the first time. "What? No, Papa, you said we were hiding. You can't leave me here alone. Look at this place. If I stay, they will find us," Alexei said, his voice hard, cutting through her panic. "I am the target, Katya. I am the one they are tracking. If I vanish completely, they will scour the earth until they find me. And if they find me, they find you." He paced the small room, his boots thumping against the wooden floorboards. "I have to go back. I have to make them think I am still in the game. I have to lead them away from here. I will draw their attention to Leningrad or Kiev, anywhere but here. You are safe here because you do not exist here. No one knows about this cabin. No one. I don't know how to survive here," Katya whispered. "I'm a student, Papa. I play the piano. I don't know how to chop wood." "You will learn," Alexei said. "You are my daughter. You are strong." He spent the next 6 hours giving her a crash course in survival. It was a brutal, efficient education. He showed her how to operate the wood stove, explaining that the fire was her heart. If it stopped beating, she would die. He showed her how to melt snow for water, how to ration the tinned food so it would last for 4 months. He took out a Nagant M1895 revolver, a relic from the war, and taught her how to load it, how to hold it, and how to fire it. "There are bears," he said matter-of-factly. "Wolves. But the two-legged predators are the ones you save the last bullet for. If anyone comes here, Katya, anyone at all, you hide. You do not open the door. You do not ask for help. If they try to enter, you shoot. Do you understand?" "Yes," she said, the weight of the gun heavy in her small hand. "There are rules," Alexei continued, taking out a piece of paper and pinning it to the wall. "Rule 1, no fire during the day. Smoke is a signal. You burn the wood only at night when the dark hides the smoke. During the day, you wear the furs and you stay active. Rule 2, never leave the clearing. If you get lost in the taiga, you are dead in an hour. Rule 3, routine. You must keep a schedule. Wake up, clean, cook, read. Do not let your mind wander. Isolation is a poison." He moved to the corner of the room and pried up a loose floorboard. Inside, he placed a small waterproof packet. This, he said, is money. American dollars, gold, and a passport with a new name. If I do not come back by the spring thaw, if the snow melts and I am not here, he couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. You take this, he said, swallowing the lump in his throat. You walk south, follow the river. It will take you to the rail line. You get on a train, you go to Vladivostok, and you find a man named Yuri. I have written his address here. You give him the gold. He will get you to Japan. It was a desperate, impossible plan, a 14-year-old girl crossing Siberia alone. But it was the only hope he could give her. The departure was abrupt. He didn't want to drag it out. He hugged her, squeezing her so hard she gasped, smelling the tobacco and the wool of his coat. He kissed her forehead. I will come back, he promised. I swear on your mother's grave, Katya. I will fix this, and I will come back for you. Then he was gone. The door slammed shut, sealing out the wind. Katya ran to the window, scraping away the frost with her fingernails. She watched the black Volga reverse, its taillights glowing like angry red eyes in the darkness. It turned and disappeared into the tree line. She was alone. The silence of the cabin was heavier than the snow outside. She stood in the center of the room, the revolver in her pocket, the silence ringing in her ears. She was the daughter of a spy, and now she was a ghost in the wilderness. Moscow was a different kind of wilderness. It was a jungle of gray concrete, damp wool, and whispered betrayals. Alexei Volkov returned to the city 4 days later, exhausted, his eyes rimmed with red, his soul feeling hollowed out. He had driven the Volga into a ravine 300 kilometers from the cabin, torching it to destroy any evidence of his passengers or supplies. He had then hitched a ride with a truck driver hauling timber and finally taken a train the rest of the way, blending into the masses of tired Soviet citizens. He reported for duty at the Lubyanka on a Tuesday morning. The massive yellow building on Dzerzhinsky Square loomed over the city, a monument to state power and paranoia. Walking through the heavy oak doors, Alexei felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Every glance from a guard, every nod from a colleague felt loaded with suspicion. He went straight to his office on the 4th floor. It was a small, windowless room filled with filing cabinets and the smell of stale coffee. He sat at his desk and waited. He knew the summons would come. It took less than an hour. "Comrade Colonel," a young aide said from the doorway. "General Orlov wishes to see you." Alexei stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Of course." General Orlov's office was spacious, appointed with polished mahogany and a large portrait of Andropov staring down from the wall. Orlov was a heavy-set man with a face that looked like it had been carved from dough. He was sitting behind his desk, reading a file. He didn't look up when Alexei entered. "Alexei Valerievich," Orlov said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "We were worried. You were absent for 3 days. No call, no report. Family emergency, Comrade General." Alexei lied smoothly. "My aunt in Tula. She took a turn for the worse. I had to leave immediately. The phone lines were down due to the storm." Orlov finally looked up. His eyes were cold, calculating. He knew Alexei was lying. Alexei knew that Orlov knew. It was a dance, a choreographed performance of bureaucracy. Orlov couldn't act yet because he didn't know where the red ledger was. If he arrested Alexei now, the leverage was lost. He needed to know what Alexei had done with the information. "And your daughter?" Orlov asked casually. "Katya, how is she?" "School records show she has been absent as well." Alexei's heart hammered against his ribs, but his face remained a mask of indifference. "She is with her grandmother in Ryazan. I thought it best she stay there while I dealt with the situation in Tula. She is safe. Ryazan," Orlov repeated, testing the word. "A lovely city. We should check on her, ensure she has everything she needs." "That won't be necessary," Alexei said, his voice dropping an octave. "She is well cared for." Orlov smiled, a thin, mirthless curving of his lips. "I am sure she is. But Alexei, we have a problem. There are rumors of a file that has gone missing. A file that contains very sensitive information about our operations abroad. You wouldn't know anything about this?" "I deal with many files, General. You will have to be more specific." "I think you know exactly which file. Orlov said, leaning forward. Listen to me closely, Alexei. You are a good officer. You have a bright future. Do not throw it away for some misguided sense of morality. If you have this item, bring it to me. We can work this out. We can protect you. We can protect Katya. The threat was unveiled. I will look for it, Alexei said, standing his ground. If such a file is missing, it is a grave security breach. I will dedicate myself to finding it. Do that, Orlov said, waving a hand in dismissal. And Alexei, do not leave Moscow again. Your travel privileges are suspended pending a security review. Alexei walked out of the office, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat. The game had begun. Orlov would send teams to Tula, to Ryazan. They would find nothing. Then they would tear apart his apartment. Then they would start looking elsewhere. Alexei had bought himself time, perhaps a week, perhaps two. But he had to stay in the open. He had to be the bait. He had to make so much noise in Moscow that they wouldn't look at the silence of Siberia. The days that followed were a psychological siege. Alexei knew his apartment was bugged. He could hear the faint click on the telephone line every time he picked it up. He stopped speaking in his own home. He turned up the radio. Tchaikovsky, patriotic marches, the drone of the news. Whenever he moved from room to room, masking the sound of his movements. He needed leverage of his own. The red ledger was safe, buried in a location that even Katya didn't know. A dead drop in Gorky Park that would require a shovel and a specific moon phase to find. But the ledger was a nuclear option. Releasing it would destroy Orlov, but it would also destroy the Soviet network in the West, and the KGB would hunt Alexei to the ends of the earth for that. He needed something smaller, a shield. He began to work late at the archives. Under the guise of investigating the missing file, Alexei was actually hunting for dirt on Orlov's associates. He spent hours in the dusty basement levels of the directorate, poring over requisition forms, travel logs, and expense reports. It was tedious, mind-numbing work, but Alexei was a master of the paper trail. He noticed a pattern in the logbooks for the motor pool. Vehicles assigned to Orlov's personal staff were making frequent, undocumented trips to a warehouse district in the Khimki district. One evening, Alexei left the Lubyanka at 9 p.m. He walked to the metro station, checking his reflection in shop windows. A man in a beige trench coat was following him. Standard surveillance. Amateurish. They wanted him to know he was being watched. Alexei boarded a train, waited for the doors to start closing, and then slipped out at the last second. The man in the trench coat was trapped on the train, staring helplessly through the glass as it pulled away. Alexei didn't smile. He turned and walked briskly out of the station, hailing a taxi. He directed the driver to Khimki. He got out a kilometer from the warehouse coordinates he had found. The district was industrial, a graveyard of rusted machinery and crumbling brick factories. He moved through the shadows, his training taking over. He was no longer a bureaucrat. He was a predator. The warehouse was guarded by two men with Kalashnikovs. Not military, private security. That in itself was illegal in the Soviet Union. Alexei circled the perimeter, finding a ventilation grate that was loose. He shimmied inside, dropping down onto a catwalk. Below him, the warehouse floor was filled with crates, but they weren't weapons. They were consumer goods. Sony televisions, French perfumes, American blue jeans, cases of Marlboro cigarettes. It was a black market empire. Orlov wasn't just selling secrets. He was running a massive smuggling ring using KGB resources. This was useful. Treason was one thing. Corruption was another. The party tolerated espionage. It despised theft of state resources for personal gain. If Alexei could get photographic proof of this, he could go to the first chief directorate, or even the Politburo. He could pit the sharks against each other. He took a small Minox camera from his pocket and began to snap pictures. Click, click, click. Suddenly, a door opened below. Orlov walked in, accompanied by a man Alexei recognized. Colonel Volkov, no relation. A ruthless interrogator from Lefortovo prison. "We cannot find the girl," the interrogator was saying. "My men have checked Ryazan. The grandmother claims she hasn't seen the granddaughter in months. The school says she was withdrawn by the father. He has hidden her," Orlov spat, lighting a cigarette. "He is smarter than I thought, but he is a father. He will break." If we cannot find the girl, we squeeze the father until he tells us where she is. And if he doesn't? Then we utilize the medical ward, Orlov said calmly. Chemical interrogation, scopolamine. We will turn his brain into mush until he gives us the coordinates. I want that ledger, and I want Volkov dead. In that order. Alexei froze on the catwalk. He had assumed they would play the long game. He was wrong. They were moving to the end game. Medical ward meant torture. It meant they were done waiting. He had to get out, now. 3,000 miles away, the silence was deafening. Katya had been in the cabin for 3 weeks. The reality of the Zaimka was far worse than the romanticized idea of a rustic retreat. It was a battle against entropy. The cold was a living thing. It sought out every crack in the walls, every gap in her clothing. In the mornings, she woke up with her hair frozen to the pillow because the fire had died down during the night. The water in the bucket was a solid block of ice that had to be smashed with a hammer. Her hands, once delicate from piano practice, were now raw and blistered. Chopping wood was an agony. The axe was heavy, and her swing was clumsy. Every log was a victory. Every miss was a terrifying waste of energy. But the worst part was the mind. Rule 3. Routine. Katya clung to the routine like a lifeline. Euro 7 Oz. Wake up. Stoke the fire. Euro 7:30. Melt snow. Boil water. Drink tea. Euro 8 Rouse. Check the perimeter, staying within the clearing. Euro 9 Rouse. Chop wood. 12 Rouse. Eat. Half a tin of beef, 1 potato. 13 Rouse. Read. She had read every book in the cabin 3 times. A manual on diesel engine repair. A rotting copy of Pushkin's poetry. An old Soviet encyclopedia from 1964. She recited the poems aloud just to hear a human voice. Her words swallowed instantly by the vast, snowy emptiness outside. I loved you, and it may be from my soul. The former love has ne'er gone out, she shouted at the tree line. A raven watched her from a pine branch, its head cocked, unimpressed. One afternoon, a storm rolled in. It wasn't like the storms in Moscow. This was a whiteout, a wall of wind and snow that erased the world. The temperature plummeted. Katya huddled by the stove, feeding it her precious wood, listening to the cabin groan under the assault. Suddenly, a thud against the door. Katya jumped, grabbing the Nagant revolver from the table. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Rule: if anyone comes, you shoot. Another thud, heavier this time. Something was scratching at the wood. Papa? She whispered, though she knew it wasn't him. She moved to the door, the gun shaking in her hands. She waited. The scratching continued. It sounded low, guttural. A bear. A winter bear that hadn't hibernated, starving and desperate. The door shook. The latch rattled. The wood was thick, but the bear was strong. Katya backed away, aiming the gun at the center of the door. She remembered her father's voice. Save the last bullet. She didn't fire. Firing would do nothing through the door, but enrage it. She grabbed the kerosene lamp and a bottle of high-proof vodka Alexei had left. She pulled the rag from the bottle, soaked it, and stood ready. The scratching stopped. Heavy breathing, like a bellows, came from the other side. Then silence. She waited for an hour. Then 2. She didn't sleep that night. She sat with the gun in one lap and the Molotov cocktail in the other, staring at the door until her eyes burned. By morning, the storm had passed. When she finally worked up the courage to open the door a crack, she saw the claw marks deep in the timber, 4 parallel gouges at eye level. The bear had moved on. She realized then that her father had left her in hell to save her from the devil. And she realized that she wanted to live, not just wait, but live. She sharpened the axe that afternoon with a new ferocity. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She was the keeper of the fire. Chapter 6. The Interrogation of Ghosts. Alexei didn't go home after the warehouse. He couldn't. He knew they would be waiting for him. He went to a safe house in the Arbat district, a small basement apartment belonging to an old contact, a retired forgery expert named Lev. You look terrible, Alyosha, Lev said, handing him a glass of tea laced with brandy. The room was cluttered with inks, stamps, and paper samples. I need to disappear, Lev. Tonight. It is not so easy anymore, Lev sighed. The city is locked down. There are checkpoints on the ring road. They are looking for someone. They are looking for me, Alexei said. Lev paused. He looked at Alexei with sad eyes. I see. And the girl? Safe, for now. Good. Children should not pay for our sins. Lev set down the glass. I can make you papers, a truck driver, or a maintenance worker for the gas lines. But it will take time. 6 hours. I don't have 6 hours, Alexei said. He pulled the photos of the warehouse from his pocket. I need you to develop these, and I need you to send them to this address. He wrote down a name on a scrap of paper. General Kropotkin, Politburo Standing Committee. Lev looked at the address and whistled low. You are starting a war. The war has already started. I'm just giving them new targets. Alexei left the photos with Lev and moved out into the night. He had to keep moving. He couldn't stay in one place for more than 20 minutes. He went to a public phone booth and dialed his own apartment number. He let it ring 3 times, then hung up. A signal. He waited. 5 minutes later, the payphone rang. He picked it up. Yes? Alexei Valerievich, a voice said. It wasn't Orlov. It was deeper, smoother. This is Major Kogan. We are currently in your living room. The tea is still warm. You left in a hurry. I am a busy man, Major. We found the map, Kogan said. Alexei's blood turned to ice. What map? The map in your daughter's room, on the wall. She had circled places she wanted to visit. Paris, Rome, London, and Lake Baikal. Alexei closed his eyes. It was a bluff. Katya had a map on her wall, yes, but she circled places randomly. Baikal was thousands of miles long. It was not a coordinate. She likes geography, Alexei said. We also found the receipt for the winter gear, Kogan continued. Felt boots, sheepskin. You bought them on the black market near Taganka. The seller remembered you. He said you bought enough for a small woman. Or a child. They were building the profile. They knew she was in the cold. They knew she was in Russia. If you harm her, Alexei said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, I will burn the entire directorate to the ground. Come in, Alexei, Kogan said, his voice reasonable, almost kind. Bring the ledger. We will bring your daughter home. We will give her a warm coat. We will give her hot cocoa. She must be very cold right now. Don't let her freeze because of your pride. Alexei hung up the phone. He smashed the receiver against the metal box, shattering the plastic. They were closing in. The receipt was a mistake, a sloppy error born of desperation. He had led them to the trail. He had to get back to Siberia. He had to get to her before they did. But he was trapped in Moscow, surrounded by a net of steel and informants. He needed a way out, and the only way out was through the fire. He turned his collar up against the wind and walked toward the train station. He wasn't going to hide anymore. He was going to hunt.